welcome to day 3 of the Democracy Solutions Summit. My name is Arianna Conte, and I am the Communications Manager here at RepresentWomen. This is also my first Democracy Solutions Summit, and I've had truly a fantastic time connecting with and learning from all of you about the different ways to build women's political power. Like the last 2 days, day 3 will be recorded, and if you have any, and closed captions will be available in your Zoom menu. If you have any technical issues during the event, you can also use the Q&A box to let us know, and a RepresentWomen staff member will assist you. That Q&A box is also the space to ask questions during each of the sessions today, and a recording will be available in the next few weeks. Today's agenda is all about building women's political power in Congress and the federal government. Our federal government, from the officials we elected to the programs we depend on, is rapidly changing. And I'm really thankful to be in a space where women are coming together to brainstorm bipartisan solutions to address these challenges. To kick off today's session, I'm excited to introduce Rina Shah. Rina is a strategic consultant, media commentator, and entrepreneur based in Washington, D.C. She's a principled defender of democratic values and fierce advocate for systems reform, and a frequent guest speaker and writer for the world's top media networks. She's also the dedicated secretary of the RepresentWomen board. Rina, I'll pass the mic over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so delighted to be with you this afternoon. A big thanks to RepresentWomen for having me here at your Democracy Solutions Summit, an annual event I am always so excited to be with because it is so uplifting. I must say, as a former senior congressional aide, as well as a former political operative, Congress is my jam. I did something a little bit different than most people. I went from Capitol Hill to campaigns, not the other way around. And I think because of that, my perspective on the programming you'll hear today will be very different. Look, I'm now a geopolitical strategist and advisor, so I'm not really playing on Capitol Hill in the way I used to anymore. But I've seen a few things, and I know the things that hold us back, but I also know the things that make that place great and how we as women can make it better. So today, on day 3 of this summit, we are going to focus on the solutions that will make that place, that hill, much better than it is today. I'm here to set the stage. And with that, I'll say, Congress is complicated, always has been, but doesn't always have to be. Look, I could sit here and tell you the stats. I could get us high, I could get us low, I could get us all in our feels, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just tell you that Congress matters. The federal level matters. Women have always been asked to take a step, go on the stepping stones to ascend to federal office. We've seen legions of men not do that. And it's time that we women step into our power in a unique way, because we know after this last election, Congress needs us more than ever before. Again, the data just shows it. We need more women there, and we can get there if we all help one another. Look, Congress is the heartbeat of our democracy. It's where the laws are made. You know that. You know that priorities are set there. And you also know that it's the people's voice, yours and mine. It's where we get heard. And when we do better there, we can really make a difference in the lives of our fellow Americans. Like I said, I've seen it up close. As an aide on the Hill, I learned that it's messy. But Congress shapes everything, every part of our lives, from national security to healthcare. Yet it only works as well as the people in it. Women, as we all know, make up over half of our population, and yet we hold less than a third of congressional seats. You know what that gap does? It weakens us. And I won't accept that. Not anymore. We are not in a position as American women to be weak anymore. In fact, we've been growing our power. So why step backward? When women aren't at the table, as you all know, we lose perspectives that are vital to tackling our nation's most pressing challenges, challenges that most of us are facing today, whether it's global tensions, economic uncertainty, or just the increasing polarization we see in the electorate. And we feel it. We know that women can do better. We're the brokers of compromise. We facilitate cooperation better than men do. And it's proven. Look, there was an incident in the Oval Office last week, and I don't want to make this partisan, but I saw 3 world leaders sitting there, and I saw emotion on display. And if you didn't see that too and feel some kind of way about that, then you haven't woken up. We've been told as women we're too emotional to hold any kind of office, that they worry about us and the things we feel when it comes time to make big decisions. I watched that exchange and I knew that women can make and win the argument over and over again, as we've seen women our American fellow women do over decades now. So again, the question becomes, why now? Why do we need women more than ever? Because the stakes are super high and women always, always deliver. So when we look at the studies, they also give us more power. They show that we're more likely to reach across the aisle, sponsor bipartisan bills, and focus on community issues like education and childcare. As a moderate Republican who's worked on many political campaigns and initiatives, over 40 to date, I've seen women bridge divides where others dig in. And in a gridlock Congress, that's a game changer. There's no denying it. Look, it's not going to happen by chance. We need solutions, better campaign funding, access to that funding, and it's true. Women face steeper and bigger hurdles to getting that. So how about we do it different this time? We mentor candidates differently. We talk about reforms like ranked choice voting in creative new ways. And we also talk about how we as women are able to get broad appeal. That's a strength of ours that's often overlooked. Look, these aren't just partisan fixes. They're actually nonpartisan. They're super practical as well. And that's what I love. I've been in the system and I can assure you it's not broken. It just really needs an upgrade. So today, let's remember, Congress matters because it's our democracy's engine. Representation matters because a Congress that doesn't reflect us can't possibly serve us. And women matter because we get things done. Let's not just talk. Let's commit today and every day to solutions because there's no better time than now. I hope you'll be lifted and learn something today and join with us in the fight here at Represent Women. Have a great summit.
Thank you so much, Rina. I am so excited to introduce our speakers for our first session centered around election administration and the importance of security for our elections, two topics that I personally care very deeply about. We'll be joined by Amber Reynolds, who is an author, innovator, speaker, thought leader, executive, civic enthusiast, and Represent Women board member. Amber is an experienced, nationally recognized elections professional who was elected to be chairwoman of the United States Postal Service Board of Governors in 2014. She'll be joined by Kate Conley. Kate is the Chief Growth Officer at Hidden Level. She most recently served as the former senior advisor to the director at the Security and Infrastructure Agency as part of the Department of Homeland Security. Conley is also a decorated combat veteran with 6 overseas deployments and over a decade of service in the special operations community. Welcome to you both, and I'll pass the mic over to you, Amber.
Thank you, Arianna, and way to go, Rina. What an amazing opening to the final day of the Solution Summit. It's an honor to be here, and this will be my third Women's Representation Solution Summit. And I'm delighted today to share this talk with a colleague of mine who I have known a number of years now and deeply respect and deeply admire, given her immense expertise in the field, and that's Kate Conley. So thanks for being here, Kate. As we get started, I just want to tee up this conversation a little bit for the audience so we understand the context of why we're talking about election administration, but also how important election administration, the conduct of our elections, the technology and the security of our elections matter so greatly to how our country represents our elected members and how we ensure that there's good systems. First, something that a lot of people don't realize, there are over 9,000 different local election offices that run this process, this very technical administrative process across the country. And of all of those people that run that process, more than 80% at the local level are in fact women. So this is again, a service that's provided directly to the American people. It is not a partisan process, but it is a universal process to provide direct voter engagement and a great voting experience, and it is largely led by women. And that is a critical reason why it's so important to get the security right, but so important to make sure that those local officials that are working across this country to serve every single voter, every single cycle, and that they have the resources they need from a security, but also a financial perspective. A couple of other things about this field. First off, most Americans have no idea how the election process works. Most elected officials don't understand deeply how this process works. And a lot of people make the mistake of assuming that, well, I ran a campaign or I volunteered on a campaign, and they think that translates to a great understanding of how the election process works. And what we know is that's actually just not the case. And it is actually a very intense, technical, administrative process that needs to be free from partisan politics. And yet it often is dragged in to be this sort of ball that gets thrown back and forth between two parties about what it looks like. I want to share a couple of stats, and then I'm going to have Kate jump in on to provide her experience as well. So first, in the 2024 election, we actually had lower turnout than 2020. In fact, about 89 million eligible voters did not vote in 2024. Let me repeat that again. 89 million people that were eligible to vote in this country did not participate. We had a lower turnout than 2020, which 2024's turnout was about 64%. That means that more than 1 in 3 Americans that were eligible to vote in 2024 did not vote. When we break that down further and we look at the top 10 states for turnout and compare them to the bottom 10 states for turnout, we find that policies directly impact voter turnout in a state. And the bottom 10 states are all usually the same and include a number of states that have long led on making the voting process more accessible, but also more secure. And the bottom 10 states all have similar attributes in terms of what their policies on the books look like. So we just know from this data, and this isn't the first time we've seen these trends, but these trends indicate for us that policies deeply matter to how voters are served, how they interact, and how accessible the voting process is for them. And another key aspect of the election administration process is, in fact, security and making sure that we have a secure system, a reliable system, and one that voters trust. And that's why I'm so excited that we have Kate here today to talk about election administration broadly, but most importantly, the security aspect of it, which she has been an incredible leader on for so many years. So Kate, welcome. I'd love you to kick us off with some of your work that you've done previously and jump into the conversation today.
Amber, thanks so much. Thank you for letting me be part of this. Thank you all who have tuned in. And Rina, thank you so much for that epic pep talk and kickoff. I'm still motivated and trying to stand still at feeling this amped. It is going to be a fun time over the next 20 minutes or so. But I think something Rina said is so special, right? That Congress and the federal government matters. And that is so true. And because of how important that is, the process in which our democracy is realized, elections, matters so much too. And that is something that I've gained such a great appreciation and understanding for, working with state and local election officials over the past 8 years in the election security space. I will tell you, as a national security expert and someone who has served overseas in both the counterterrorism and the strategic competition domains, I thought I knew what complex operations were. You know, when you're talking about multiple domains, so cyber, physical informations, that is like standard military lexicon and standard practice. I was blown away and humbled when I realized the complexity of election administration and what these incredible public servants, state and local election officials around the country, to Amber's point, of both political parties and some completely apolitical, the challenges that they take on, the sacrifices that they make, both personally and professionally, to deliver democracy to the American people and to maintain the security and integrity of that process. So in addition to all of the complexities of actually administering, these incredible public servants are also charged with the tremendous responsibility of securing that process. And while elections may be political, election security is not. Election security is national security. And so that is why it is so critical that we don't ask these public servants to take this burden on alone, because it's all of our democracy and it takes a team to defend it. And so that's where all of us play a unique role in that. And so I'll speak a little bit to the federal government role this year and then turn the mic back over to Amber. But just to kind of give folks dialing in a snapshot of what this threat landscape was like, I will tell you the 2024 election cycle, we experienced the most complex threat landscape to date for any election cycle in our history. When you talk about the number of cyber threats, physical threats, and information operation threats that we had to face, we had to not only defend against, but in the game of security, you're not going to stop everything, right? Prevention will not happen all the time. So you have to plan for how do you respond when bad things happen. And I will tell you, we faced last election cycle, a significant range of malicious cyber actors, whether it was foreign adversaries like Russia, Iran, China, to cyber criminals like ransomware groups who were targeting government offices as well as other critical infrastructure sectors to lock up their data and systems to extort ransom. To we had acts of domestic terrorism, people who were putting incendiary devices on ballot drop boxes in Oregon and Washington, people who were mailing fentanyl-laced letters to election officials across the country of both political parties, people who were swatting. So when you falsely report a criminal incident at someone's home or business, people were swatting election officials across the country, again, of both political parties. And so when you look at how smooth and effective 2024 was, it is really a testament to the incredible service, commitment, and resilience of not just the process, but the people who made the process a reality. Because I will tell you, it's not for a lack of bad actors trying to do bad things that November and the months prior went so smoothly. It was because of the tremendous efforts by election officials and colleagues across the country in preparing for, training, and responding to the things that they faced, to include Mother Nature. Let's not forget about hurricanes Helene and Milton. And so I think it's super important as we talk about the critical importance of administration. As Amber said, you can't look at it alone without security, right? Because confidence and trust in this process is rooted in the fact that your vote will be counted as cast. And ensuring that happens means we have to protect and safeguard this process in order to ensure its security and integrity.
Thanks, Kate. And you brought up a number of issues I just want to maybe expand on here too. You know, we talk about security, and really when election officials are, they're part of has been deemed critical infrastructure. If the folks on watching today didn't know this, President Obama actually, as he was leaving office in 2017, designated election administration as critical infrastructure. So that joined a whole new swath of covered entities under the Department of Homeland Security and deemed that critical infrastructure. The interesting part that a lot of people don't realize is that didn't necessarily follow with adequate funding at the state and local level for election officials to secure their facilities and sort of get ready for all the threats that were going to come in these years ahead. And thankfully, the Department of Homeland Security has been, and your agency that you came from, have been a part of granting to states and providing that support. The nonprofit community has stepped in some ways where they could, but really it remains that it's a fairly underfunded part of our national infrastructure. And often election officials at the local level are doing more with less, as we often see, and they're trying to do this mammoth of a job and magnificent of a job, even with underfunding and resources, which again ties into the policy making aspect, the congressional aspect, the reason why it's so important that women, and also women with election experience, get into these roles, so that they can, they can really represent the voice of those election officials that often go underserved in Congress. Wanted to also ask you, Kate, one of the things that I think continues to come up every election cycle is a lack of understanding that ties into voter education about how the election process is secured, what people can do to better understand it. I'd love for you to talk about all the ways that CISA played a role in that, and maybe give some examples of what you saw around the country in terms of states that really did a great job of educating their voters on how elections work, but also how they're more secure.
Amber, the irony of you asking this question, because for those on the line, I will tell you 8 years ago when I was first learning about election administration, everyone told me to go to the best. And that meant one of my first flights was out to see Amber in Denver for her to teach me what election administration entailed, and just really it was, again, such a humbling experience to understand what these operational leaders must do. And I think that's part of what you're talking about, Amber, right? Is like the power of information and insight, right? For people to trust something, it often takes them understanding it, maybe not completely, but they have to have some kind of knowledge. And especially when it comes to, really deep trust, people don't trust institutions, they trust other people. So having people who represent those institutions be transparent, be out there, specifically election officials, talking to their constituents, talking to voters about the steps they take to ensure the security of the process is such a crucial part of this. And I have to tell you, I was blown away in terms of how we've seen this specific role evolve and really become a priority for election officials across the country over the past several years, as we've seen especially the power of disinformation, right, across social media platforms. And so how to counter that, don't just wait for the disinfo to come, but get out there and proactively communicate to the American people what the process is about and why they should trust it. So the National Association of Secretaries of State had a campaign called Trusted 2024, where it highlighted really was a lot of different works and projects done by states across the country that talked about the elections process and how security is implemented throughout it. And it was pretty incredible between the NAS website and then the National Association of State Election Directors website. They had, every state had a website dedicated to sharing this type of information with their voters. And it encompassed things, everything from little cartoon videos explaining the process, kind of like the old school how a bill becomes a law, but like how does elections work, to really detailed. I think the state of Montana had like 76 videos about the independent pieces of the process in the state. And then in New Hampshire, we saw the election office actually used generative AI to come up with some integrated videos about some of the great New Hampshire public servants talking about the process and the importance of democracy in our country. So I think, election officials really went out above and beyond the call to try to get the American people to hear about why this process is so secure and why they should have confidence in it. At the federal government level, I will tell you, this was also a major priority for us, and largely because we knew heading into the 2024 election cycle that our foreign adversaries, specifically Russia, China, and Iran, were absolutely intent on taking actions to really achieve the same outcomes, even if their tactics were different. And those outcomes that all aspired to were, one, undermining public confidence in the security and integrity of the process, and two, stoking partisan discord. And we saw that happen this cycle, whether it was the Iranians hacking the presidential campaigns of both political parties, or whether it was in the days and even on election day, where we saw Russian disinformation campaigns, actual videos alleging, some type of activity to undermine confidence in the process in battleground states. Like, these were thoughtful, deliberate campaigns, again, intended to undermine the American people's confidence in the process. And so heading into November at CISA, alongside the FBI, we did a public service announcement campaign, really focusing on the narratives we expected to see coming out of Russia and China in particular, and Iran. And then I will tell you the other thing that I want to give tremendous credit for is, as a federal government led by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the DNI herself, Avril Haines, you saw more public briefings about the state of the election security landscape and what was happening in the 5 months leading up to election day than we've ever done before. Starting 120 days out at a 30-day cadence, then a 15-day cadence, you saw ODNI out there telling the American people what was happening. And so again, I think, trust is built on transparency and really personal relationships, and understanding that and making that a priority this year was something we were super proud to do.
It's amazing work, Kate, and thanks for giving all of that summary. I want to kind of jump on to something that you mentioned, and I think that often you sort of hear advocacy type people and groups talking about certain policies that they're pushing for in election administration. And and this is partly because of my experience running elections, it's not even just about a policy per se, but a lot of times those policies can actually make the election process more resilient. So a good example, the states where, you have to vote only on election day, or you have very limited periods of time to vote. Maybe they don't have early voting. Maybe they don't offer an expansive option to voting by mail. But those states that kind of push everything to that one day are less resilient, because you're basically putting all of your eggs in one basket, if you will, forcing the entire populace through essentially a process on one specific day, and really not allowing any wiggle room for something that comes up, whether that's a weather event or some other security event. Whereas the states that allow expansive options, they're actually more resilient, because they're processing voters over a long period of time. If they have any issue with, a power outage or a piece of equipment or a fire or a natural disaster, they can actually adjust. Whereas these states that, put everything on one day, like some people suggest, are actually less resilient. And I think that's something that, it kind of gets lost when we're talking about the importance of policies in this. And the second thing I just wanted to get, and I'd love your input on maybe one policy that you think could be really impactful, or a piece of technology or innovation as the final word. But, a couple things that I just wanted to say quickly before we close out. So we've seen a significant modernization of voter registration systems and more accessible systems over the last 10 years with the enhancement of technology that have also added security features, added more transparency, to your point, into the process, and even things like ballot tracking that has really started in 2009, if you can believe it, in Denver, Colorado, but now more than 120 million people have access to use. That's also made the process more secure, because people have access to that. So I would love, if you want to close us out with an example that you've seen of a technology or innovation or even a policy that has really improved security for elections. We'd love to hear it.
Well, to your first point, Amber, I could not agree more. Absolutely, in terms of, this takes me back to my military days, where there was a saying, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So basically, if you were ever relying on one thing and you didn't have a backup or resiliency or some kind of alternative means, don't even plan on it. Don't even consider it complete. Like, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. And so that is really the essence, I think, of folks who come from the operational community. You never have a plan that you don't have a backup plan for when it's no fail mission. And so I am with you in terms of the incredible benefits to states that do have early voting, and they're allowed to not just expand the window of accessibility for registered voters or qualified voters, but they're able to test the systems, right? And to your point, Mother Nature is a factor you're never going to control for. And so being able to pivot, to offer alternatives, to have that degree of operational flexibility that still enables, American citizens to express their voice through the process, I think is just such a crucial thing and a really important part. I will also say, I think increasing the ways to vote. So in terms of like mail-in voting and the importance of having paper records. Again, I believe 1 is none and 2 is 1. I wish we had a paper and digital record for every ballot cast. So that way you have resiliency against whatever plays out. But I'm very, very happy about the progress we've made as a country, really moving to paper records of every vote cast, where I think, we were at nearly 98% of jurisdictions across this country had a paper record that the voter verified. And so that is a great sign. Now, to your point on technology and, what are some key things that we should implement and move towards down the line, I think it's less a thing and more of a mentality and concept, and that is agility, right? We have to meet an evolving threat environment. Our adversaries are going to keep coming after our democracy. It is such a symbol of who we are as a nation and this global power that we are, that it will remain a target in the years to come. And we have to understand the importance of protecting that. And that means, security is not a static thing. It is a dynamic mission. You have to continuously move the ball downfield because your adversary is. And so with that, I do think, to your point, a range of technologies have really moved the needle in terms of security, whether it's vulnerability scanning that can happen at scale and automate results to get to offices, whether it's things like endpoint detection and response, right? Or now we have really unique counter ransomware software solutions that even further increase the security of systems, and becoming more normalized having backups to your system. So that way, when something does go wrong, you're prepared, and really having rehearsals and trainings around these things. So again, like in the military, if you didn't tabletop it, like you weren't ready for it. And so the importance of training and preparing to execute no matter what you're faced with, I think is really just such a core piece. So sorry to not have like the silver bullet answer, but I will tell you it's the mentality, right? Agility, I think, is essential.
That's perfect. Well, thanks so much, Kate. Thanks for having this chat with me for the Solution Summit. Thanks to Represent Women for having us. I'm going to turn it back over to Arianna. And thank you all for attending. These conversations need to keep happening. Hopefully we've given you a little bit to think about with regards to representation and also election administration. And definitely follow my friend Kate. She's got lots of cool announcements coming up. So let's follow her and root her on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amber and Kate, for sharing your expertise with us. Our election administrators are truly the backbone of our democracy, and it was really telling that 80% of the individuals who are working to defend our voting systems are women. This is my shameless plug. If you can, to go be a poll worker. It's a great way to meet your neighbors, do your part to engage in our political process in a nonpartisan way, and build connections that then build trust in our election system. I did it last year, and it was a blast and a half, and I'm absolutely going to be doing it again. We'll be right back, and then when we return, we'll get ready for a conversation on prioritizing childcare and paid family leave. See you back in 1 minute. Our second session is titled Prioritizing Childcare and Paid Leave, The Path to a More Inclusive Democracy. Luba Gretchen Shirley, the founder and CEO of Vote Mama, will be leading today's discussion. She made history as the first woman to receive federal approval to spend campaign funds on childcare, ran for Congress in New York's 2nd District, and leads a trio of interconnected organizations dedicated to electing mothers and transforming our political system. She'll be joined by Representative Jennifer McClellan of Virginia. She is the first Black woman to represent Virginia in Congress and currently sits on the House Energy and Commerce subcommittees. Representative McClellan also has leadership roles in the Congressional Black Caucus, the New Democrat Coalition, and chairs the Reproductive Freedom Caucus, Abortion Rights, and Access Task Force. Kristen Rowe Finkbeiner is the co-founder and executive director of Moms Rising, a nonprofit advocacy group with over 1 million members across the nation working to improve economic security, stop discrimination, and build a nation where everyone can thrive. She has advised lawmakers at the highest level and been published and featured in hundreds of news outlets. Our final speaker for this panel is Dawn Huckelbridge, who is the founding director of Paid Leave for All, a national campaign of organizations leading the fight for paid family and medical leave for all working people in the United States. She has held leadership positions at Supermajority, American Bridge, Planned Parenthood Action Fund, People for the American Way, and the Barbara Lee Foundation. Take it away, Luba.
Thank you. Hello, ladies. It's great to see you.
Hello.
It's funny that we are having this conversation today. My entire family has come down with the stomach bug this week, and my mom, who is my childcare, was the last to fall. I have driven back and forth to school 3 times today, for drop off to pick up my daughter who got sick in the middle of the day, and then to pick up my 2 boys because my mom could not do pickup. So it seemed like today was the right day to have this discussion on paid leave and childcare. Um, for those of you who don't know my story, I did not have access to paid family leave when I got pregnant with my first child and ended up resigning because I couldn't get off of any childcare wait lists. And my biggest fear was that I was going to be mommy tracked and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I ended up moving out to Long Island, which is where I grew up, for my mother, who is my childcare and who I rely on because there is no way that I would be able to work without her. Was not planning on running for Congress, but did so with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I feel like, Dawn, you and I have discussed this so many times, but anytime I talked about paid leave or childcare during the campaign, there was always someone who would say, you should really ignore the women's issues and stick to the bread and butter issues. And it would always infuriate me because there are no more basic bread and butter issues that our country faces. We lose more than $120 billion a year because of the lack of childcare. We lose more than $22 billion a year because of paid family leave, the lack of paid family leave in this country. We're the only industrialized nation that does not invest in paid leave or childcare. And American families are spending more than 20% of their income on childcare. It's a completely unsustainable situation. It's a failed market. We all know this. We can talk about it till we're blue in the face. The 4 of us have talked about this for a long time. I'm excited to be there and have this conversation. I know we are all stressed with what is going on right now in our country and what we can do about it. So I'm happy to be in your company. I would love to start with one of my favorite mamas in Congress, Representative Jen McClellan. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is on the table? What actions are we currently even looking at? What is the possibility of actually getting some sort of policy solutions right now in Congress?
That's not a good news story, unfortunately. We are in triage mode right now. We will file all of the proactive bills that we have filed in the past, everything from, paid family medical leave to childcare stabilization grants to, other bills. I have a bill that provides grants for the intersection of for new moms because it addresses the intersection of the maternal mortality crisis and the child care crisis. We're filing all of those bills in the 119th Congress, but we are frankly in triage mode as the Trump administration first is freezing federal funding in a while. They freeze it and then they unfreeze it, freeze it and unfreeze it. Is looking to find trillions of dollars to fund tax cuts for billionaires, and is really grinding the federal government to a halt. So I wish it was a good news story, but it's actually not, because some of the things that would actually help are even on the chopping block. And so for a lot of people who need childcare, they're part of the I'm one of them, or was until I lost my parents. We're part of the sandwich generation. We're trying to care for our children and our parents. And many people who have left their jobs to become care providers, home care providers, are on Medicaid, and we're fighting cuts to Medicaid. And so, this week was the State of the Union address. I brought with me a woman from my district who is providing care for her grandson who has Down syndrome, and that is covered by Medicaid. And she's doing that so that her daughter can work while she's also trying to care for her own mother. And so we're in triage mode right now, and it's really frustrating because the big thing that changed when you ran for Congress, Lubia, sorry. The big thing that changed was COVID. COVID stripped bare, like it pulled the curtain back and said, this is not just a woman's issue. This is an economic issue. This is a workforce issue. This is like they're dads. There are dads too who want childcare. And everybody saw childcare as an essential service. Childcare providers are essential workers. And yet somehow we have collective amnesia 5 years later. And this, for Virginia, this weekend is the 5-year anniversary from when we went into the state of emergency. So I think making sure that we are, yes, we will continue, like I said, continue to put those proactive bills and fight for the proactive policies. But first, we have to fight against any effort to roll back progress we've already made.
Yeah. Collective amnesia. I feel like that's a really good explanation for, I feel like, and maybe Kristen or Dawn, I'd love you guys to jump in on this, but you talk about the Lanham Act and what we actually did during World War II. And then we had an opportunity and we shut the childcare centers down and we had collective amnesia that this actually worked. And we almost passed childcare back in the 70s and Nixon vetoed it. And I feel like collective amnesia is kind of the history of paid family leave and childcare in this country. And, Kristen and Dawn, you guys have been on the front lines of this fight for a long time. Please jump in and talk to me about what you're seeing now. Do you have any hope at this point right now? And I hate to say that and sound very negative, but please tell me what you guys are thinking.
I feel like
I always have hope.
Kristen has to go first if it's about the hope, because she's Mrs. Hope. So you go, Kristen.
I do always have hope. It's true. I believe in us. And when we're talking about collective amnesia, we're talking about, to be clear, a select group of people who get selective amnesia. And that is, generally speaking, men who are lawmakers. And right now in the United States of America, I think we saw some QR codes and some data going by in the break. We rank 91st of all nations in terms of women's representation and political parity in our national legislature. 91 is low. That is a failing grade. It's not 91 an A grade. It is a low grade. So the work that you're doing with Vote Mama, the work that Dawn's doing, the representation, thank you so much, that Representative McClellan's doing, is what is going to have us be at that tipping point eventually so that we can build that hope for that change. And when I define hope, I don't mean like, oh, I'm going to sit on my couch and be hopeful. I mean like, I'm going to get involved with an organization, Vote Mama, Paid Leave for All. I'm going to run for Congress. I'm going to help somebody run for Congress. I'm going to get involved with Moms Rising. Because what we do know is that, as we just heard Representative McClellan say, we are in a serious, significant, and devastating situation. We're in a situation where right now the job that we all have is to stop bad things from happening. As you just said, and you just heard, Medicaid is under attack. That is 40% of births in America. That is 72 million people in America. That's their health insurance coverage. That is under attack right now by Donald Trump and Republican leaders. We need to stop that attack. Stopping attacks on things like that are a victory. But we need to not let go of what actually lets our economy, our families, and our businesses thrive and rise. And we know that's childcare. We know the return on investment. Parents need to be able to go to work. Kids need to be able to thrive. Childcare workers need to be able to earn living wages. And to do that, we need some semblance of a universal national childcare program, which you said we almost had in the 1970s. We almost had 2 years ago. We missed by one vote. And it's no longer a question of if, but when we will have that, because the hope part is that we will not give up. And I will just share with you at Moms Rising, we have grown by over 100,000 members just in the last month. We are at 1,143,000 members, I think. We are 1 in 300 people in America are now active members of Moms Rising. And we have quadruple the action rate in 2025 as we had in 2024. And to just give an idea of the 2024 action rates, there were 82,000 Get Out the Vote volunteers. They held 2,300 local events in the 6 weeks leading up to the election. That's hope in motion. And that hope in motion is gaining momentum. Because again, the selective amnesia is not coming from moms. We are not forgetting. We know what we want. We know what we need. We know what our contributions are. We're holding up the economy. It's our consumer spending choices that are holding up the economy. And we are not giving up. And so that's my hope in motion. And to you, Dawn.
Yeah, I always give it to Kristen to kick it off because she's good at that. And also, if suddenly the lights go off behind me, I'm in like a co-working space, I may have to go wave my hands to put the motion sensor on. So yeah, collective amnesia. I mean, I talk about this a lot, that if COVID was a test, we failed it because we implemented all of these things that most of the world takes for granted in terms of a social safety net. it worked. We have all of this evidence of how well it worked. And then suddenly, oh, we can just let it expire and let women go back to doing the job of being our social safety nets. So I was actually asked this today in an interview, what will it take to get these policies over the finish line? And to be clear, as I think everyone knows, and Kristen probably reinforced, these are bipartisan issues. These are nonpartisan issues. These are some of the most popular issues in the country. We did battleground polling really recently. Everything from 95% of non-college men to 76% of Republicans across the board in battlegrounds were in support of paid family medical leave for all working people. But I think what it will take to translate that political will to Washington, D.C. is electing new people. And I think it's going to take, I think some of the folks that are there are not going to be convinced. And I think we do need, as we've said, more women, more caregivers, more people of color, more people of different lived experiences, more young people, people who have actually experienced what it's like to struggle to make ends meet. So that therefore you understand this is, as we started the conversation, an economic issue. Women are not special interests. Families are also very connected to jobs in the economy. So I think it's changing. And as I think we've seen in the last few months, record numbers of people are running for office. So I'm hopeful this is not going to be decades, but hopefully just years to change and transition over.
I have to say, I'm so glad that you threw it to Kristen, because that was the shot of energy that I needed today. It's been a rough day and I needed that. When I first started our foundation side, we had started the political side first. And when I first started the foundation side, my goal was like, I want to solve childcare. I want to solve paid family leave. These are the two issues that are nearest and dearest to my heart. And frankly, by the time you realize really truly how terrible our policies are, you are now a new mom and you are no longer have the bandwidth to go out and fight for the systemic change that we need, because you're struggling to survive new motherhood and maintaining some semblance of your career. And I wanted to fix these two problems. And honestly, there are so many organizations like yours that are doing this work already. And when I started on the foundation, I wanted to really break down the structural barriers that hold moms back from office, for exactly the reason that you just said, Dawn. It's getting people into office who have that lived experience, because legislators legislate on their lived experience. Representative McClellan, you legislate on your lived experience. We've talked about this many times. You have two young children, and when you legislate, you're thinking about them. I would love you to talk a little bit about kind of your experience as a mom and how it has changed the way that you legislate. And actually, if you wouldn't mind, I know this is slightly off topic, but not really. There's a story that you told me once about talking about paid family leave not paid family leave, about nursing and breastfeeding on the floor to other state legislators to explain that lived experience. Can you tell that story, please?
I will, but first, I did it backwards. Most women who get involved in who run for office, they already have a family and they get involved because something happened that prompted them to get involved with the PTA or run for school board or something. I did it backwards. I ran for office and then I got married and then I had kids. And so it completely changed how I view everything, because I was going through experiences that before, when I first got elected, were just like, well, theoretically, I believe this policy, but now I see how it impacts my life. And it's everything from, first as a daughter, I want just to piggyback on the last conversation we had, as a daughter of, my mother, my grandmother, all my aunts, my great grandparents, everybody, every woman on my mom's side of the family were domestic workers, were caregivers, caring for other people's family, first for free, and then for very low Jim Crow wages. That gave me the experience as a legislator to say, we need the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights to give care workers the same rights every other worker takes for granted, like minimum wage, overtime pay, anti-discrimination protections. Then I got pregnant. And sitting in my doctor's office, understanding everything that could go right or go wrong with my pregnancy gave me a whole new perspective on abortion restrictions and, access to contraception restrictions and how laws impact pregnancies throughout. everything from miscarriage management to, all kinds of things that people don't think of being impacted by abortion law. So I was the first member of the House of Delegates in Virginia to be pregnant while in office in 2010. In the 2011 legislative session, I'm now a new mom who's nursing. I pumped just enough to get through daycare, which I was lucky enough to get. That wasn't easy, but I would pump just enough to get my son through daycare. And then after 6 o'clock, if he was hungry and I was on the house floor, like he'd have to come down. I wasn't brave enough to nurse him on the house floor, but I would nurse him. I'd leave the room, I'd nurse him. I may have nursed him in front of some people and they didn't know because he was all wrapped in a blanket. That also gave me the experience when teachers were coming to me saying, like, look, we need our school boards to have lactation policies so that we can pump at work, have a break, have a place to store it. No brainer, I get it. I'm in a committee meeting and an older gentleman, he was probably in his 60s, said to me, well, why can't she just pump during lunch? I said, okay. So school, she probably had to get to school at 6 a.m. I mean, she probably got up, she probably pumped between 4 and 5. She's teaching with no break until her lunch period. When you don't pump for that long, you get engorged. What that means is your breast is like huge. If you don't pump, you can get an infection. He's like, no, okay, I get it. Move to report the bill. That's the kind of experience he genuinely didn't know. And then somebody else said, well, why can't she just pump in the bathroom? And I was like, would you cook your child's dinner? Would you eat in the bathroom? Would you cook your child's dinner in the bathroom? Because that's basically what you're asking me to do. Oh, okay. That's why it is so important. In the middle of COVID, as we were having our briefings with the governor at the time, who was a Democrat, who believed, in all of these things, and he's trying to figure out, what are we going to do to get the workforce back in? I was the one on the call always saying, what about childcare? What about childcare? What about childcare? What about childcare? Because I'm like, I need these kids to go somewhere so that I can get back to work. You can have all the policies in the world that you want, but if I can't if I don't have anywhere to put my kids and I can't afford it, I can't go to work. And it's the life experiences that people start to realize, oh, that's how these policies impact your day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm. That is, I don't know if you've Brittany Pedersen just became the 14th woman to give birth while serving in Congress. When she was a state senator in Colorado, she actually got paid family leave for state legislators passed. Are you waving your lights, Dawn? She got paid family leave for state legislators passed. Colorado is the only state in the country that has paid family leave for state legislators. And now Brittany has introduced legislation to try to have proxy voting, virtual voting. And this is something that is so critical that most people don't even realize. And it's a bipartisan bill right now. We have both Republicans and Democrats who are supporting it, both moms and dads, because they understand how important it is. If we want people in Congress who have the lived experience of what most families are going through, who are the same people who are going to pass legislation for paid family leave and childcare because they get it at a visceral level, we need to make it easier for them to serve. And this has gotten so much pushback and so much fight. And she literally just flew across the country. I mean, I was having conversations with her and she's like, I have to make the decision about whether or not I stay in Washington and give birth. And I don't have my toddler and my husband and my support system, but I can vote. Or I stay in Colorado with my support system, but I can't do my job anymore. And she just flew across the country with a brand new baby to make sure that she could cast a really important vote. These are very simple structural changes that we need to make. Vote Mama has been working to pass campaign funds for childcare. We're now at 39 states across the country to make it easier for caregivers to continue to run and to serve. Most people don't realize that we have more millionaires in Congress than we have moms. only 6.8% of our Congress members are moms of minor children. So we don't have people in office who are actually thinking about these things regularly. Are we out of time already? Did I not realize that? No, we still have a little bit of time, I think. So, Kristen, you are the one with all the hope. You are the one who has this huge army behind you. Tell me, what is one thing that we can do as legislators, as activists, as women in this field? What is one thing that we can each do to push paid family leave and childcare policy forward so that it becomes an actual reality at some point in my lifetime?
Well, first, I don't have an army behind me. We are an army together. And I think that is the first point of how do we make this change. Stories are so important. As we've talked about right now, telling your story. What happened when you had a baby? Did you have a baby? 86% of women in America do become moms by the time they're 44 years old. And everybody at some point or another has had a mom. So everybody with an actual belly button should have a story about childcare, about paid family medical leave, and whether they had access to it or not. And so when we tell our story, we do three very important things that we've heard today. One, we let people know they're not alone, that when this many people are having the same types of structural problems, we don't have an epidemic of personal failures. We have national solutions we can solve together. That's where we become visible, right? We were talking about, how does this become invisible? How do we get collective amnesia? We reverse the collective amnesia by sharing our story, by building our movement. Those stories also do another thing. They help leaders. I call it the Give a Clue project. We talked about that. Many leaders have no idea because they don't often reflect us or frankly respect us. And so telling our stories really gives an idea of what's happening more than the numbers. The other thing we do, elect more people who do reflect and respect us. So you can run for office or you can help somebody run for office. And then also talking to the media about your story helps shift the national narrative. So what can you, we, and all of us do together? We can do one thing. Put on our mask first, like on the airplane. Take care of ourselves, possibly even consider taking media breaks during the day so we're not watching the bad headlines all day. Take like 5 minutes, maybe not the whole day. Take care of yourself. 2, take care of our community. Make sure that you have a goal for how much you are going to activate each week. Pick an organization, pick many organizations, pick all of them on this Zoom right now, and also call your members of Congress at least one time a week. And this is important. People are like, if my member of Congress is with me, should I still call them? Yes, they need to be thanked. They are in a really difficult situation. And when they are in the elevator with other members of Congress who don't necessarily agree with them, if you call and say, hey, can you make sure that you're pushing paid family medical leave and childcare? Then that member of Congress who's with us can say to the other member of Congress who's against us, my constituents are so bugging me about this. I really need you to take action on this. So keep calling. Call your members of Congress who aren't with us and get them with us and share your story. Your story doesn't have to be a novel. It can be a paragraph. I could go on for a long time, but together we are definitely unstoppable. So the last thing to do, don't give up. To you, Dawn.
Just add on, because you covered a lot of it. In addition to calling every week, call as much as you can. Also show up wherever you can. I don't know if you've watched in the news these town halls and how afraid so many members are. And that reminds us we actually have power. You know, a lot of these people are not used to being challenged. They're not used to asking tough questions. And they like a lot of, kid gloves. No, it's time to remember that members of Congress represent you. They work for you. Yes, absolutely. Thank all the good ones, Representative McClellan and everyone else. But the ones who aren't, tell them what you think and demand that they do something different. Ask where they stand on paid leave and childcare and other issues that matter to you, and ask specifically what they're going to do to fight for it. So I just think so much of this comes down to accountability, to pressure, and we have much more power than sometimes it feels like.
I have to tell you, just hearing you talk about town halls, I had no intention of running, and my congressman refused to hold a town hall, and I organized one for him, and I literally had a 6-foot cardboard cutout made of him that stood next to me, and I did the town hall for him, and we had like hundreds of people show up, and this is my attic, and it stayed up here in my attic for the longest time. I finally gave it to a friend, was like, get this out of here. But honestly, so many people in our community showed up, and they held him accountable, and we ran a damn good campaign against him, and he didn't run again because he realized that so many of his constituents were so unhappy with his vote. So showing up to town halls really makes a huge difference. Please Go to town halls. If your congressman or congresswoman refuses to hold one for them and get your community there. I think we have one more second. Representative McClellan, what else can people do? What makes the most difference?
Stories. Tell your story, tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. And to get your story to your member, especially that's when you're doing the calls and visiting your member who's doing the right thing, give them the story that they can then tell in committee, to the media, to the press. They may invite you to the State of the Union. You may not want to come right now, but it's helpful for people to see a face behind the policy. And you all have friends who are in districts that they need to hear from them, and support the organizations that are doing the work. Right now, everybody is just trying to figure it out, this new reality that we live in. The world has been turned upside down, but there are organizations that have been doing the work day in, day out, like the ones that you see here today. Support them, because this is the hardest fight we've had in my lifetime to protect the progress we've had, let alone build on it and continue building for the future.
Thank you very much, ladies. It was so great to see you guys today, and you've all given me hope.
Thank you
Thank you.
all.
Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Representative McClellan, Kristen, Dawn, and Luba, for sharing your personal stories with us. It is crystal clear that our laws have to change to make it easier for working families to participate in our democracy. As a caregiver myself, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, I know firsthand the need for flexibility when working in public service and in the nonprofit space, and just how hard our systems currently make it for individuals who need those options to take care of their families. After a short break, we'll have a conversation about the groundbreaking electoral reforms being proposed at the national level. See you back here in 1 minute. For our next session, our speakers will be discussing the need for electoral reform within Congress to ensure better representation in our democracy. This fireside chat will be led by Cynthia Richie Terrell, RepresentWomen's founder and executive director. Cynthia is an outspoken advocate for institutional reforms to advance women's leadership and representation in the United States, a founder of Fair Vote, publisher of a weekly column in Miss Magazine, avid knitter, fantastic baker, so many other things. Cynthia will be joined by two of our amazing partners, Meredith Sumter, who is the president and CEO of Fair Vote, who is working to advance a more representative and functional democracy that delivers for every American. She is a fierce advocate for ranked choice voting, RCV, and proportional representation, and previously was the president and CEO of the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. Eileen Reevy is the executive director of Rank the Vote, leveraging over a decade of experience in grassroots organizing, coalition building, and strategic planning. She has been involved with RCV advocacy since 2019 and currently sits on the board of directors of Oregon Ranked Choice Voting Associates. Welcome to you all, and I'll hand the mic over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Arianna. And wow, thank you to that amazing panel. We just heard from an amazing group of powerhouse women. And I got to say, that's one of the nice things about this Democracy Solutions Summit, is that every panel is filled with a collection of powerhouse women. And I wish you all could see sort of the back end, all this like, oh my goodness, oh my gosh, like another amazing panel. So thanks to our speakers, thanks to the team, and thanks to being here with us. And well, thanks for joining us for this important conversation about how do we address the barriers to get some of these policies passed that we've been hearing about today and over the course of the last 2 days. And I would say it goes without saying. I think we've all been saying the word unprecedented quite a few times, at least I have. It goes without saying that we seem to be in an unprecedented era for democracy, not only here, but really around the globe in one way or another. And just before we start, I just wanted to, set the scene a little bit, if you will, if we're all on a stage and we're characters playing our parts. In 2024, over $14 billion was spent on congressional races. Don't know the exact number. I've heard between 14 and $15 billion, but that's a lot of money. And given that, I think it's even more sobering to realize that very few congressional districts were actually competitive. I think fewer than 40 out of 435. Nearly all incumbents won, despite all that money. Only a handful of challengers won, despite all that money. Women's representation in Congress declined for the first time in over 2 decades, despite all that money spent. And polarization is at an all-time high. But the good news is there are solutions, and that's what this panel is all about. So we're going to have a chance to talk about it. We've got about 20 minutes to impart to you all the wisdom that these two women have, but really looking forward to this conversation with Meredith and Eileen, two of our country's leading experts on this topic. So the team helped put together some good questions. I'm not sure we can get through them all, but I feel like in some ways, one of the most important ones to me will provide sort of a broad overview for this conversation is this. Then we can get into some of the details that the two of your organizations work on. But what's the value of working toward long-term transformative strategies at a time when immediate change is also needed? And I'm curious about the work that Fair Vote does on how this relates to Fair Vote's work on ranked choice voting and the Fair Representation Act, but also Eileen work on the national popular vote, which you have also had such a big hand in working on over the years. So I feel like dipping into that conversation for a few minutes might help set the stage for some of the particular policies that we're going to dig into. And Meredith, I will call on you first.
Well, Cynthia, it's our honor to be on a panel with you as someone who has long championed the transformative reforms that are necessary to make a material difference in the uncompetitive political environment that you have outlined for our audience. So it's no surprise to those of us, for Eileen and myself, and for those of us that are in the structural reform space, these are hard problems that are not going to be resolved unless you are doing the long-term transformative work to change the way that Americans are selecting the people who represent them. So currently we've got our congressional districts, over 90% of those seats are not competitive. Most of them are the vast majority of them are determined in primaries, where you have anywhere from just 8% of Americans who are turning out for primaries. So that's a fraction of the American electorate who are deciding who gets to make the rules for all of us. And we often, when we have these conversations, we talk about voters not getting representation as a result. But I have to tell you, Cynthia, I often think about the people who run for office who want to go into politics to solve problems, and then they get elected and they find that if they are going to try to reach across the aisle, or if they're going to try to find creative solutions to problems that require working with those who may not have a similar political background, they're at risk of losing their job, of getting primaried. And so for them, we're not going to have the kind of solutions-focused politics or governance that the American people need until we change the political incentives to enable real leadership on the part of leaders who are elected. They want to lead and legislate and govern in the interest of their voters. But currently our election systems are such, with a single choice voting, the political incentives are not there for them to be able to do that authentically, that they are oftentimes more beholden to narrow interests, sometimes narrow partisan interests, that keep them from doing the work, the consensus building necessary to represent a broader view, a majority of the interests of the voters that they seek to represent. So I think that's why I'm in the structural reform space, and I invite my colleague Eileen as well to share her perspectives on this as well, and why that long-term structural transformational change is necessary to get to the kind of responsive, accountable political representation that the vast majority of Americans are asking for.
Thanks, Meredith, and thank you, Cynthia. It's so good to be on this panel with you. Immediate change is needed, but it's rarely ever actually immediate. We might see it on the national scale and see it passed by Congress, and that's the first we've heard of it, but that might have been 5 years in the making. And I don't believe we have anyone on the call who is yet a Supreme Court justice. And so none of us have quite the amount of power we might want to have an immediate change. So it's important for us to exert our impact and exert our power where we can make a change. And I do believe long-term power building is how we do that over time, because these things, our success is often measured in decades. Voting rights for women, voting rights for men of color, later for women of color. The success of those is measured in decades or lifetimes. As Cynthia alluded to, an issue I've worked on previously and will for the rest of my life until we get it passed is national popular vote. So when we win that campaign, hopefully in the next decade or so, it'll have been lifetimes in the making. There have been over 800 attempts to amend the Constitution, specifically around the Electoral College. The last serious effort was in 1968. We are still chipping away at it through, now not a constitutional amendment, but through an interstate compact. And that is something that it will be one of the most transformative things that we've done in our lifetime. The biggest change and biggest enfranchisement to voters that will occur in our lifetime and in previous ones. And it takes time. So we need to start and have our power be exerted where we can make an impact. Municipalities and local elections, that is a big part of that. You can have that voice that's more likely to be heard by engaging with your city councilors or putting something on the ballot to change how your electeds are elected if you don't feel they're being responsive. And it eventually does build up to those longer, bigger term solutions, because by normalizing reforms like ranked choice voting or proportional representation at the local level, we demonstrate it works. We get the secretaries of state and the county clerks and the election administrators to realize, hey, we can do this here. We already have. I don't need to oppose it at the state or national level. And so it helps us continue to build up and fight for that reform at the national level, which when it happens, 95% of people will think, oh, wow, what an immediate change. That was nice. So, lessening opposition by demonstrating success is a key part of winning these types of campaigns. And that starts 5 to 10 years ago as we work towards these things together.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I like that vision. I wonder, Meredith, if you can talk a little bit about the specifics of the Fair Representation Act, just to level set a little bit, and why you think it's a good fit for our American candidate-based system that we are used to here.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. So the Fair Representation Act, there are two components of it. It would institute ranked choice voting for Senate races and proportional ranked choice voting for House races. And that proportional representation element of it is really important to getting that responsive, accountable governance and that fairness in different voting groups, minority groups, having their say and having their elected leaders be responsive to them and to represent them. Proportional ranked choice voting in particular, in the American political tradition, we do have a focus on candidates. And proportional ranked choice voting it's the only form of proportional representation that is winning and working in the United States. And we see it working at the city level, actually across 9 cities currently in the US. There are other forms of proportional representation that are out there, and many of them are whether they're in Germany or in other countries outside of the US political tradition. But we find that PRCV delivers that proportionality, but in a way that is aligned with, again, American political traditions, and where we are focused on electing candidates, and it's the candidates who are incentivized to well represent the voters who've put them into office. So the Fair Representation Act, it's been a long-standing North Star for fair vote. And going back to what Eileen was saying, it's important for us to demonstrate to the American people, as well as to our elected representatives, what proportional representation means and how it works here in the US political context. So Eileen had talked about the importance of demonstrating the functionality of these transformative reforms first at the local level. And that's really important. You need to have an evidence base that shows how these systems work and how it delivers value for voters, but as well as for elected leaders. So already we've seen more and more localities come to Fair Vote. They come to us to learn about ranked choice voting for, let's say, single choice elections. And for many of the localities, they might have a county board, like where I'm raising my family in Arlington, Virginia, or they might have a city council. And they walk away with the concept of, well, you know, maybe we should be adopting proportional ranked choice voting to adopt our city council. Portland, Oregon actually just implemented both ranked choice voting for mayor and proportional ranked choice voting for their city council in November. And I will tell you, Cynthia, it was so exciting to see Portlanders put these reforms into play, and the results, I think, speak for themselves. Overwhelming public support for these systems, as well as Portlanders electing the most politically balanced and diverse city council that city has ever had. So, you know, I think for people like Eileen and myself, and enabled to and our ability to get to work with RepresentWomen and you, Cynthia, and the amazing women that are running and winning in ranked choice voting elections, it's important for us to show what these reforms look like at the city level, build up to eventual statewide adoption of proportional representation. And of course, there are many forms out there. For Fair Vote, for us, it's the proportional ranked choice voting that we think demonstrates both delivers on proportional representation, but also in the American political tradition. And then from there, I think you have to build that evidence case for why national level reform is not just possible, but necessary and needed. And so I think it's just a real honor for us at Fair Vote to get to collaborate with Rank the Vote, with grassroots organizing at the city level, and with RepresentWomen to have more amazing women leaders not only run and win in these elections, but also carry forth the message as well as the evidence base of what these reforms can do, including with proportional ranked choice voting.
Yeah, absolutely, Meredith. And I have to say the example of Portland, Oregon is such a good one for this conversation, because I think it really reflects the goals that the three of us, and I suspect a lot of people share, is that we want voters to have more power to get the representation they want for their communities. So this isn't a one size fits all, we're guaranteeing a certain set of outcomes, but we want voters to have the power to elect candidates whom they feel represent them. And then this, I think, gets to the point about competition. We also need a mechanism. We need better systems so that those candidates and those elected officials can be voted out of office if they're not representing the people in a way that voters want. And so the beauty, I think, of the Portland, Oregon illustration, Cambridge, Australia does this so well in its Senate, is that there's ideological balance. You've got people from the right and from the center and from the left. More women are getting elected, more men of color are getting elected, younger people, lower income people. Truly, it's a system that reflects the interests and needs and passions of the voter. And so anyway, I think that's a pretty compelling set of metrics to be looking at. And it begs an interesting question, I think, about the kinds of coalitions that are needed to make electoral reform a reality in the United States. We do some study at RepresentWomen of what's been what have been some of the levers of change in places like Latin America or, really around the globe? Mexico is a terrific example. And some of that, I think, is due, those other countries innovating, has been due to really a strong democracy movement that was multifaceted, that was composed of labor unions and women and moderates and younger people, et cetera, et cetera. But Eileen, you've got such a great track record working in Oregon and elsewhere on building coalitions. Do you have some thoughts to share with us on the value of those as we move forward?
Yeah, they are the key. That is how you win campaigns, is because those coalitions represent organizations, whether they have hundreds or tens of thousands of members, that those people are trusted leaders in their individual communities and trusted voices. And if you can earn their support for your reform, then that goes so much further than, just one time door knocking on someone's door and hitting them cold. It provides a level of respect and verification that, well, maybe I don't have time to dig all the way into this, but the League of Women Voters and the NAACP and ACLU have looked at it, and I support all those groups, and that's important to me. So I think that creating meaningful coalitions that are reflective of the communities where the reform is being considered is absolutely necessary. And yeah, the importance of it really can't be understated. It does have to be something where you're working with everyone, because we're looking at what matters for voters. What is the right thing for the people, not to help one political party or one ideology, but this is putting voters first. And I tell you, those coalition groups, they're made up of voters themselves. They'd much rather have reforms that are focused on putting the hands in the power of their people rather than in party leadership or, other types of systems.
Yes, I think that all the polls and exit polls that we see confirm that voters are really hungry for that and yearning for that. So we just have a few more minutes, but I wanted to get both of your reactions to just how do you think things would change in Congress if we had implemented a voting system like the Fair Representation Act, had multi-winner districts and a ranked system? And I'm thinking particularly about the incentives, I think, Meredith, that you mentioned. How would the incentives change for members of Congress if we had a different system that elected them?
Well, I mean, the top line is Congress would be more functional and representative. But I think for me, when I think about it, it's I think about all the elected leaders, Cynthia, that you and I and Eileen have spoken to, who they want to respond and represent their voters. But if they don't do what they're told to do and vote a certain way, then they're out of a job. And I think the higher up you get, the harder that reality is. And I think if you have an election system that empowers a leader to first be accountable to their voters. And look, we're American, we're all partisan. That's part of our traditional, our political tradition, fine. And that's totally fine. The winners of these elections, of ranked choice voting elections, are leaders who are both first strong in their base, but they're also able to persuade and reach and represent voters who may not pick them first. And that is so critically important. Because that empowers that leader to do more of the deal making and the problem solving that requires going across the aisle that we're currently lacking, and our policies show it. I think you would see a return to more issues-focused coalitions that are all about getting things done for their voters, where they have a shared interest, rather than blanket partisan votes that don't necessarily represent or respond to the pluralistic needs of voters in their districts. I also think that you would see more women and people of color in office who are representing their constituents. But I think bottom line, that sort of consensus building mechanism that comes with these ranked choice voting elections between an elected leader and the voters, at the same time, for that elected leader to retain the support of the majority of their constituents, they need to do that same political consensus building when they're in office with people who they may not agree with at all on certain political or ideological issues. That's fine. And that's actually the way that Washington used to work. what are your voters interested in? What are my voters interested in? And how can we, if there's alignment there, how can we work together to realign our policies and or our government incentives to deliver for our shared voters? And I think that's a very powerful place that the American people are wanting our Congress and our elected leaders writ large to return to, or to move forward to, I should say.
Yes, absolutely. Finding common ground around a larger table with more people present, I would say. And I think you're right that both ranked choice voting and the multi-winner form of it really provide an incentive for elected officials to work together on our behalf, as you said. And I think that really is what Americans want. They just may not know that that is the package that it comes in yet. Eileen, we don't have any time left, but do you have like 12 seconds of anything you want to say, or can we wrap up on that note?
I'll do the 12 seconds. With these reforms, we will have more women, more people of color, more diversity of socioeconomic backgrounds and political ideologies, more renters, less stockholders, less millionaires, more moms, more people, less lifelong politicians. And so I'm honored to be doing this work with all of you. And thank you everyone for joining and hearing this. And we look forward to having you in the fight for these reforms.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Go to Rank the Vote and Fair Vote. You'll notice a theme there. And thanks so much to both of you. Passing it back to you, Arianna.
Thank you so much. It's been proven time and again that our systems need to change to support women running, winning, leading, and serving. All of the topics we talked about today and over the last few days are just a snapshot of what has to be done to make us a truly representative democracy. And I know I'm speaking to a group of, looking at the attendee count, 87 people who already know this, but women are uniquely equipped to make those changes. We'll now take a quick break, and when we come back, our final panel of the week will highlight the need to create a more bipartisan political process from women who serve as role models for how we can do this. See you soon. Welcome back to our fourth and final session of the 2025 Democracy Solution Summit. I've had such a fantastic time the last 3 days learning from experts who are truly committed to defending our democracy. Now I'm excited to introduce CEO and founder of Running Start and Represent Women board member, Susanna Welford. Susanna founded Running Start in 2007 to inspire young women and girls to pursue political leadership. Susanna is a globally recognized expert on women in politics, and she speaks frequently about the importance of inspiring more young women to enter the political space. U.S. Representative Christy Houlihan of Pennsylvania is an Air Force veteran, engineer, entrepreneur, educator, and nonprofit leader currently serving her fourth term in Congress. She is the first female veteran named as ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, Military Personnel Subcommittee, and is member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Betsy Wright Hawkins is the head of Article 1 Advisors, supporting entrepreneurial organizations foster dialogue across the political and ideological spectrum. She was the founding managing director of Democracy Fund's governance program and spent over 25 years as the chief of staff to 4 Republican House members who represented majority Democratic districts. And finally, Jennifer Perotti-Lim is the co-founder of Republican Women for Progress. In 2016, she was invited to speak on the closing night of the DNC, addressing almost 33 million people. And previously, she served as the director of health policy in the Labor, Immigration, and Employee Benefits Division at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and also served on the U.S. Senate Committee on Business and Entrepreneurship. Thank you for taking all the time to be here today and share your expertise with us. And with that, I'll hand things over to Susanna.
Yes, thank you so much, Arianna. Well, I was so thrilled when I got asked to sit on this particular panel because the power of bipartisanship is something that has really informed my entire career and that I believe in so deeply. And I've had conversations with all of you panelists about this. Um, I'm the CEO of Running Start, and Running Start works with young women to prepare them for political leadership. And since the beginning, diversity in political ideology has been one of the key things that we have made part of our platform. In the beginning, we would bring people of different ideologies together, and actually it kind of worked out okay. They became friends and were less partisan because of it. Starting in 2016, we realized that we needed to be more intentional about how we worked with the participants of Running Start to get them to have real civil discourse. I think that that's what I want to talk to you all about today. Like, what are the ways that we can encourage civil discourse? What are the things that actually work? So I'd love to have a practical conversation about what works. And just want to say one word. I'm a very proud board member of Represent Women. And one of the reasons that I serve on the board is I really believe that once we get electoral reform, we're going to have people in office that appeal more to their constituents. The people, they're not going to be the extremes, and we are going to have less partisanship because of it. So, Congresswoman Houlihan, I would love to start with you. Obviously, Congress, not very, not very civil, not a lot of civil discourse, and it's not just a matter of it being unpleasant. It's also that Congress is not getting things done because they don't work across the aisle. It's not collaborative. So can you just talk a little bit about what you think are the key components to encouraging people in Congress to actually find common ground? It's a big
First,
question. Sorry.
it's a big
Yeah.
question, and it's actually really ironic or timely for today. First of all, thanks for having me here, having this conversation. I was raised by one Democrat and one Republican, my mom and my dad. They voted every year, twice a year, and they canceled each other's votes out every single time. And then they came home and they had dinner, and then we discussed occasionally politics, and we discussed how important it was to do your research, to know the candidate, and to vote independently of the people, even those who are in your family, and vote who you thought was the right person for the job. So that's how I was raised. I come from a district that is 40% Democrat, 40% Republican, and 20% independent. So I come from one of those pretty unusual purple places in the country. There aren't a lot of communities like that, in the dozens maybe. And so I do believe it's my job to represent all of the people. And I do believe that even though I am a Democrat, that I have a responsibility to all of the folks who are in my district. And I also believe that my community demands civility and decency, demands discourse, and to comport oneself with decency. And I do try to lead in our district with that as sort of a North Star. And I also, frankly, try to lead with that in Washington, D.C. And why I tell you this is an ironic day is just today we took a vote to censure one of the members of Congress for his behavior at the president's conversation about the state of America. And I was one of only 10 Democrats who voted to censure my colleague. And I did that because had I had the opportunity to vote to censure my colleague, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for her behavior, I would have done the same. And I really think it's important that we set standards for how we behave. I think it's really important that every one of the 435 of us who serve in Congress understand that there are rules of the road, rules of the floor, literally, and we need to follow them. And that is one of the ways where I hope that I'm leading by example. But I can tell you that it has not been greeted with a lot of enthusiasm today. My office has been, unfortunately, inundated with very angry people who would rather have not seen me do that. And so it's hard as a person who sits in an office to figure in a seat in an elected office to figure out what do the people I represent think of that, because it's like being a school teacher and only calling your kids' parents when something bad happens. I'm just trying to understand what the people feel like. And I feel like I represent the people in demanding that we be decent to one another.
I love that. And I think that we want to see more members of Congress doing things where they know they're going to face backlash, but they're doing it for their values. So I love that. Betsy, if I can go to you, you were not a congresswoman, but you were a serial chief of staff. You were chief of staff 3 times. So can you talk a little bit? 4 times? How did I miss the 4th? Okay, I'm sorry. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw when you were in Congress and whether you were able to make those relationships across the aisle and sort of, on the staff level, how does it work and what are key components?
Yeah, so absolutely having those relationships is essential. And I will say, my work now is around working still with staff, including Congresswoman Houlihan's awesome chief of staff, who works with one of the organizations that I work with, and will come in and share her wonderful expertise with more junior staff. She's one of the ones that we really rely on to come and do that. There is a real hunger among the younger chiefs on both sides of the aisle to understand how to make the place work better and to get to know chiefs on the other side of the aisle and to build those relationships. And you don't always see it, but I continue to be really pleasantly surprised, shocked maybe even sometimes, by the fact that it is still there, in spite of what you see on the news, and that, really good people still come to Washington wanting to make the world a better place. They differ on maybe what that looks like, but they come to the Hill wanting to get something done. Not to scream at each other. Certainly there are those people too. But they fundamentally understand that there is a way to do this job that they don't get. And they seek out wisdom about how to do it. Maybe not enough of them, maybe fewer of them than used to. But there is still a strong cohort that seeks out that knowledge, and enough to keep me busy, enough to keep others busy. And so, when I was a chief, it was impossible and I think it's still not possible to make lasting change, to pass a bill. If you are a Republican and you don't have Democrats on board and you ram through a bill, that bill is going to be, even if you get it signed into law, it's going to be a target the next time the majority changes. If you're a Democrat and you ram through a bill, it's going to be a target for Republicans the next time the majority changes. So on a practical level, if you want to make lasting change, you will always have the other side of the aisle on board. And that was true when I first came to DC. I'm not saying how many years ago, and it's true today. It might be harder to do, but if you do the spade work on the front end to bring the other side of the aisle in at the beginning and really truly make it bipartisan and build that coalition, it still can be done. It's harder, fewer and farther between, but it can be done. You just don't always hear about it. And the Modernization Committee, the Select Committee on Modernization, is one example of that, which I can talk a little bit more about if you want. But
thank you, Betsy. I could not agree more. Right. We don't want to just have policy for one cycle. We want it to be lasting. And how do you do that? You work with the other side. Jennifer, so I met you when you had just founded Republicans for Hillary, and now you run Republicans for Progress. Some people say that it's only the Democratic side that is working to bridge the gap and to find common ground. Can you talk about your work and what you do and why it is so important?
Thank you so much, Susanna. And I was just like trying to take notes on Representative Houlihan and Betsy Reid Hawkins' comments. I could listen to you ladies forever. I'm definitely a rookie here. But at Republican Women for Progress, we have focused our work on trying to ensure that we're training and recruiting Republican women to run for office who believe in governing in a bipartisan way, because we feel like that's the best way to create lasting policy, like we were just talking about. And so the Republican women that we work with and the Republican women on our Women to Watch list, we're choosing them based on their dedication to working across the aisle even before they run. So, Lisa Murkowski, for example, Susan Collins, all of these types of Republican women, the same Republican women who are speaking out right now. And right now it's kind of a weird time to talk about bipartisanship, right? And I was trying to find some glimmers of hope for Republicans wanting to work across the aisle in this environment, because like you're alluding to, Susanna, a lot of Republicans right now feel like they have a mandate to go after all the policies they want to go after. They really don't feel like, a lot of them don't feel like they need to work in a bipartisan way. But back in January, Politico's Women Rule did this great interview between two new freshman House members, Julie Fedorchak from North Dakota and Sarah Elsfreth from Maryland, where I'm currently living. And it was such nice. It was such a nice interview to read, because both of them were talking about working across the aisle. Julie Fedorchak was talking about how she thought that they could find common ground on energy and inflation and even border issues. And Sarah Elsfreth is working on getting a group together of women in the House who have dinners like the women in the Senate do across the aisle. And I just found that so refreshing in January when we were trying to catch up and figure out what this new normal was, that they were, new to their roles and in this environment and still talking about working across the aisle, even on some of the most hot button issues these days. And so those are the types of, women that we like to, train to run for office. And those are the types of Republican women specifically that we're trying to recruit.
Thank you. That is excellent. And now I have a question that I will start with the Congresswoman, but I would love your thoughts. And it's a really simple question. Are women better at this?
How can I not say yes? But I also understand that that's my bias. But I do think that my lived experience has been in Congress, that women are more likely to be people who I am able to find and work with. What I will say is, personally, I'm an engineer. I'm a veteran. I worked for 15 years at a basketball apparel and footwear company. I am now at Congress. I'm used to living in an environment that is very, very male forward, and so I don't have empirical evidence one way or the other that women are better to work with. But I'll say this. Stephanie Bice from Oklahoma is my colleague and partner and friend, who is working with me and has worked with me for the better part of 2 years, coming up on 3, on paid family and medical leave. And I do think that she's an empathic and effective leader. And I do think that this is a place where we might be able to find some common ground. And to the point of the conversation earlier, it doesn't work. Family leave and medical leave will not work if it's not bipartisan. If it doesn't come from both sides of the aisle, it will just get destroyed the next time around in the next cycle. Similarly, I work with gentlemen and women on a group that is a bipartisan group on climate solutions, and we look at things like permitting reform and transmission reform and change too. So I don't know that I could necessarily say that we are the dominant class in this. It sure helps to have more people in Congress who are diverse and different than one another. We are less than 20 something now, a little bit more than 27% of the body women. But I can tell you that engineers are fewer than 25. And that's a problem, you know, when we're looking at things like AI and cybersecurity and biotech and that kind of stuff. So we really need diversity in those candidates and the people who serve us in these seats.
Betsy, do you want to weigh in?
I don't think every woman in Congress is necessarily solutions oriented. And I think there are, you know, I can point to, you know, I mean, my mentor, right, the man that I worked for, the member that I worked for the longest, you know, was an amazing mentor, and, you know, everything that I ever learned about how to do a good job, and, you know, everything I ever learned that set me on my way, you know, that I've been able to say, you know, kind of pointed me on the right path, and it came from Chris, right? So maybe that just means there are exceptions to every rule. I think women probably are more oriented towards collaboration, but I also think there's an issue, and the last panel was discussing the issue of incentives and rewards. And at the end of the day, most members will do what works, you know, I think. And so if you want behavior to change, you know, you need to change what's going to work. And so in districts like Congresswoman Houlihan's, or in the districts that I worked in, which were majority Democratic district Republicans that represented majority Democratic districts, or, you know, 40% Democrat, 30% Republican, 30% independent, you know, sort of similar to Congresswoman Houlihan's district, which is right up from where I live in Chestnut Hill, Pennsylvania. You know, it's kind of a similar set of incentives from those that she's dealing with. But when you have a 75% or 80% Republican districts, it's very different set of incentives. Very difficult for, you know, members to try to bring a very red group of primary voters along, in spite of their very best instincts. So
maybe gerrymandering reform we need to talk about too. Jennifer, passing it on to you, and then I'll have one final question.
So I was able to briefly work for Olympia Snow. And I feel like she kind of embodies what I feel like Republican women that we support work in Congress. And she was such a vision, and I feel like I didn't really see a lot of men work in the way that she worked on all the legislation that she looked at. So for me, I feel like, and they did a study on this a while back, I think it was in 2021, where Republican women especially are really poised to work across the aisle with their Democratic women counterparts. I don't know if it will play into 2025, but in the past, definitely, because they were more ideologically similar to Democratic women than a lot of Republican men. So that's kind of interesting. But I've always thought that, from what I've seen working in healthcare reform and also working for Olympia Snow, that it was always women leading the bipartisan charge.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I think we only have 2 minutes left, and I've got like 5 questions for you. But how important is it to cultivate bipartisanship in your personal lives? And Congresswoman, maybe we could all just be short and sweet, but you know, if we're talking about work, but
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm one of the few Democrats in my very large family. So in my personal life, it is a very, very mixed bag of folks. And my family are the only Yankees in my extended family. And so it is important that we have, you know, that kind of cross fertilization of ideas.
essential. Uh, essential. I'll just leave it at that.
And Jennifer, if you'll answer, but then also give us a tip, how do you do it?
It's essential. I have so many Republican friends who are happy right now, and so many Republican friends who are sad. And my husband's a Democrat. So we've always, especially in my marriage, we've always talked about issues. And I think once you lose being able to talk to somebody as a person, that really hurts your ability to understand them, to come up with, and if you're legislating, it hurts your ability to come up with policy that will serve your constituents. So I think if you can't talk to somebody like they're a person, even on issues that you feel very passionately about, it's really a disservice to yourself as well.
I totally agree. And I think, another thing that we work out at Running Start is just plain old exposure, because I think so many of us never get outside of our bubble and we have no idea why people think anything different than what we do. So just being in a room with people who are not like you and having a conversation, and hopefully, like you say, liking them and finding common ground on personal things that can then let you listen to them and maybe learn something. Thank you all so much. I wish we'd had 5 times as long for this panel because I know we could fill it, but thank you very much.
Thank you to you and to Represent Women.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. In these rapidly changing times, we're reminded that democracy isn't guaranteed. It's something we must continually defend, rebuild, and renew, and bipartisan collaborative support is essential to that. The impact you've all had in your careers is proof that when more women have a seat at the table, better policies get made. Now, to close out the 4th Annual Democracy Solution Summit, I'm so excited to send the mic back over to Represent Women's founder and executive director, Cynthia Richie Terrell, and Winny Chen, who is the associate director for the governance program at the Democracy Fund, an independent foundation working to ensure that our political system is able to withstand new challenges and deliver on its promise to the American people. Cynthia and Winny, I'm so excited to welcome you guys to the floor.
Thank you so much, Arianna, and thank you, Winny, for joining us. I know there's a lot we could be talking about that could take several hours, but you're always so concise in your remarks. I have a sense you're going to be able to deliver a wallop in just the 7 or 8 minutes that we have together. But of course, there'll be lots of other opportunities in our future to continue this conversation. Just to set the context somewhat, I think we all know, or I can attest to the fact that a small percentage of philanthropy dollars go toward women's representation and women-led organizations, and an even smaller percentage goes to the kinds of policy solutions and structural change reform work that we've been discussing today and over the last few days at the Democracy Solution Summit. So I'm curious to hear your quick thoughts on why it's important to you to be involved in funding a movement centered around building a more representative democracy, and just sort of your high-level thoughts about how you see your role in this vital and important work.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. And before I jump into that, I just want to say congratulations on this terrific summit. It's such a great and special and unique space for these discussions. Well, I'd say, what it means to me to be part of this movement, right now, it feels important, and it feels hopeful in some ways, even in the kind of uncertain period that we're in, right? And I'd want to acknowledge that, we are in a precarious moment for our democracy. And it's because we are in this moment that I think it's the most it's important to support this movement, to build a better democracy and to be in community with women in doing that. I'd say, in the last few months, I've been doing a lot of reflecting, as I'm sure everybody here has been doing, about where we are and how we ended up here. And one of the questions that I've been kind of turning over in my head has been, would we be where we are if we had had more women's representation, if we had a larger voice in shaping our government, our governance, democracy, would instead of this authoritarian moment and this democratic backsliding, would we be on a different path towards something like a just, multiracial, feminist democracy, right? And there's no way to answer that. But it led me to think also, you know, it's also really hard for people to sort of support. It's hard for people when they don't see themselves in the government or the democracy, or when they don't see the government working for them, right? And it's not a hyperbole to say democracy hasn't worked as well for women as it should.
Really ever. It's not like there was a time that we want to go back to that was like the golden era for most of us. So
Yeah, exactly, right? Women have been excluded from our democracy, we've been discouraged, and even in this moment, kind of threatened from participating. So I could see why it's easy to stop like defending some of the institutions in our democracy, and why it's almost easy to walk away. But at the same time, like that's also why it's so much more important to have women at the table, to have a seat at the table, or to have at least half the seats at the table, right? To build this structure, to give governments some real legitimacy, and to shape policies and our democracy the way it should be, right? And so that's why I'm hopeful, right? I'm hopeful that after this sort of this moment that we are in, I don't know how long it'll last, but on the other side, there's going to be a period of rebuilding. And I would hope that women with at least half the seats at the table can help build and shape a future for this country that works for everyone.
yeah, indeed, boy, I hope so too, to put it mildly. Wondering if you have some quick thoughts on just the role of philanthropy. I know the Democracy Fund was a great leader last year in the All In by April campaign, and whether there are other kinds of strategies like that that you think might be particularly impactful in the reality in which we're living in this year.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. Well, I think for right now, the role of philanthropy is really, it's about the immediate threats, right?
Yes.
You know, we are still thinking about the long-term change and the democracy that we can build and the future that we want to build. But right now, it's focused on resourcing groups on the ground, democracy groups that are defending our institutions. And I think philanthropy can still play a very important role right now, right? We have an important role in defending democracy by protecting civil infrastructure, by helping ensure that pro-democracy organizations have the resources for their own safety, but also for the safety and for the safety of their staff, but also to go and do the work during a more challenging time. And given that we still have to do two things at one time, right? We still have to continue to look to the future and put forth a vision that people believe in, right? How do we build these institutions and structures and a democracy that works for everyone so that people stay in the fight?
Yes, for sure. One of the things just I'm not sure that I've said this privately, but I'll say it publicly now. One of the things I value about the work of Democracy Fund is how accessible you are. And I feel like that's a really valuable thing for those of us who are seeking money just to support team members and projects and programs and work, having that ability for transparency and ease of the processes and so forth. So just want to applaud the Democracy Fund, and there are certainly other foundations who are doing that as well. But I think that's one of the burdens has been on these small staffs that are sort of scrambling to make sure we're getting things in on time and reports and this, that, and the other thing. So I think it strikes me that there's a role to play in for philanthropy in that work, and that you're really a leader in making the process of learning about available money, et cetera, really as smooth and as accessible as possible. Because I think a big component of all this work is having it be accessible to all the people who really are voiceless and may feel voiceless in today's democracy. So big kudos for your help with that.
Thank you for that. And, you know, that comment really, it just reminded me, is like, you know, philanthropy, it has a really important role right now to lift up those voices that you were just talking about, right? To support movement leaders who are exploring the most creative and effective ways to advance representation right now and to advance our democracy and democratic ideals, right? And we have a role, an important role in kind of lifting up those voices from these communities that are, I'd say historically and by design excluded. And I'd also add that in addition to being accessible to our grantees, we also have a responsibility to rally other funders to bring resources into this, into democracy space, because this is an important, critical, pivotal moment.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Thanks so much, Winnie. I see we're at time. Any closing thoughts from you? I so appreciate your wisdom and your support and all the sage advice that you have to give us. Anything else you want to add?
Just gratitude for this space, for getting into these conversations, for creating a place to be candid and open and thoughtful and also hopeful.
Yes, indeed. So many good threads that we need to weave together into that more successful movement of the future. So thanks so much again, Winnie. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure you'll be hearing from Winnie more on other panels and other conversations, because we certainly need to have more of these conversations. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. So I want to say, like, wow, could not be more proud. Thank you so much to the entire Represent Women team for pulling together, wow, 3 days of incredible panels with hopeful, candid, heartfelt perspectives from such a variety of people, such a variety of women. So really appreciate everybody in the team who's dropping the links and welcoming the speakers and sending out the emails and asking the speakers to speak, and just the whole gamut. It takes a lot of careful, thoughtful planning to pull off an event like this. Just want to give a special shout out to Alyssa Bombardier-Shaw, who was this year's coordinator of the Democracy Solutions Summit. Thank you. Let's all give a round of applause as best we can with our emojis for Alyssa's work on this. Thanks to the board members, particularly Rina and Susanna and Amber, who participated in the Democracy Solutions Summit. Thanks to all of you. I think 400 plus registered each day for this summit. And finally, I would say, you knew I was going to get to this eventually, but if you're able to support this work that we're doing to advance systems changes to build women's power, we would really appreciate it. We'll put a donation link in the chat, so feel free to contribute whatever you can. And as Tori is reminding us, please fill out the attendee survey so we can hear what you loved and hear what we can do better next year. And just again, a huge thank you for joining us today. You can keep in touch with us on our Represent Women website. Look for follow-up emails and work with us to build women's political power to transform our democracy. So thank you, everyone.
And with that, we've concluded day 3 of Represent Women's Democracy Solution Summit. Echoing what Cynthia said, what everyone said, thank you to everyone who's joined us over the last 3 days. All of the speakers who are here today, yesterday, and on Tuesday are members of the Women Experts in Democracy Directory, which is a resource where all of you can connect directly with these experts who are committed to building women's political power and improving women's representation at all levels of government. Invite them to speak on your panels, pay them and learn from their expertise, collaborate, especially pay them. Women deserve to be compensated for giving their time on important issues like this. And now we have one final ask from you as well. We dropped the survey in the chat, and your feedback will make this event stronger in the years to come. And if you're interested in getting involved with Represent Women, I can't recommend enough to sign up for the Women's Power Collaborative. Here you can connect with women from across the country who work in democracy reform, electoral reform, and are concerned about building women's political power. Next week, you'll hear more from us, including YouTube links from all 3 days, resource guides from the fantastic speakers who have presented over the last 3 days, and you'll get more information about our DSS after hours debrief conversation on March 25th. We're really excited to have a space where all of you, our amazing audience members, will get to connect, ask questions, collaborate with the Represent Women team and our speakers about the summit. We hope to use this time to build community with one another and continue the conversations that we started over the last 3 days. Thank you so much, and we will be keeping the chat open for a few more minutes where you can grab all these links that were shared today, and all of these resources, again, will be available next week. Have a good day, have a good weekend, and thank you.